Hello, everybody. So, I did a video 8 years ago about using 3DCoat. I still use it on every CAD model that I do, but a lot has changed since 3DCoat version 3 and Rhino 5, and there's a lot of questions I'm frequently asked. So I'm going to go through and show the workflow again. So this is how I would save a file. I haven't capped these. You know, these are open surfaces, so I don't break history. So I can move that, and it updates here as well. So this is where I like to save a finished file. I hit purge, and I get rid of blocks that I'm not using. I want to keep my groups. Any annotations. So purge is things that you're not using. So in my, I'm going to cancel this. In my file here, I have it linked to a lot of different, I've already purged it. I have a link to a lot of different stone blocks, but I don't need them for this model. So that's where purge comes in. It will get rid of layers that have no geometry on them. We want to save our bitmaps. That's pretty much it. I like to keep my groups. I like to keep my bitmaps, but any textures not being used, any environments not being used, those can all go away. And then the next thing I do is hit save, and it saves it out. And now I will take and delete things that I no longer need. So I'm going to hit delete, and on my delete button, I use lock children. So under recording history, I have lock children. If I just try and delete, let's see, if I try and delete this, nothing happens. That's like a feature request I have with McNeil. But so my delete button will turn lock children off, delete it, and then either leave lock children back on. We can just look at it. Turn lock off, delete, and then turn lock back on, or turn lock off, delete, and just leave it off. This is where I would leave it off because I'm breaking history on all of this stuff because I've already saved. So I'm going to delete that with a right click, and then I can take this, which excuse me, which is two separate things that are grouped together. So I'm going to join them, and then I'm going to cap them, and that gives me a closed object. This, I'm going to join it. Oh, this was messed up. Let me isolate. Nope, wrong one. This, playing around earlier, this got capped by accident. So I'm going to explode these and delete the caps that shouldn't be there, and then join them back together. And we'll go back to this. I'm going to select, so this button I always use, it is select open surface and select open poly surface. Okay, so when I click this and say select open, these are the things left open, and all of these should be cappable. So I can just say cap, they all get capped, and now when I say select open, there's nothing added to the selection. So here is where I go to export to 3DCoat. Now my layer structure gives me a little hint once I get over there. So this is a cutter. So if you look down here, it says cutters, centerline, surf. I have kind of a tree view of things that are going to be negative, and things that these are going to be geo, edges, surf. So geo is the things that stay. Cutters are the things that get deleted away. And you have to have a layer structure for this to work once you get over to 3DCoat. But now we're going to say export. Actually, let's look at my export command. So I'm going to put this, this is in the Discord, but I have this scripted so I don't have to remember all of these settings every time. So what I'm telling Rhino is export it to this temp.obj file. And I want to export the geometry as a mesh, and I don't want to export the object names. Object names in Rhino are usually useless. They're auto-generated, so they don't give you anything. And instead, OBJ files let you have names on things. So I'm going to say the group or the layer name, export objects, export layers as groups. So each of my Rhino layers will turn into groups, which act like layers in an OBJ file, but they call them groups. So basically we're going from layer to layer. Detailed options, advanced options. This is my mesh settings. So I've just found that these are kind of a good, and basically everything's 0 except distance from surface. So I've got 0.003 there. It will give me a very large mesh. It'll be probably in the 150 meg range. It's got plenty of detail. And, you know, this is just a temp file that constantly gets overwritten. The final file size will be, for this one, it'll probably be in the 5 meg range. But initially when it comes out, it's going to be huge. It's going to be like 150 meg. Now, there's something in here that is not in. So I'm going to say export. And this trips up people all the time. Export. So when you have this and you set it to OBJ, there is more options in here. So I want it to go to that file, but when you come and look at the options, here is what always trips people up. Vertex welding. I think the default is unmodified, which we'll go ahead and do the unmodified version. So this has now been turned off. If you want to see it again, you got to click this button. Okay. We're going to export it. We're going to replace that file. Here it's asking what our mesh settings are. These are the same settings that I had in my little export button. You know, that 0.003 is going to give us a really big mesh. I tell it okay. And then it writes the file. And now we'll switch over to 3DCoat. And so the version of 3DCoat I'm using is 2022.39. I think I'm a stable release behind current. This is like the July update. I haven't updated it this month. This is a Ukrainian development team. So, you know, buy a license, support them. They need it. But you go to Voxel Sculpting, and then I'm just going to drag and drop the file in here. So let me go to my STLs. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to drop it and import into Voxel space. And I'm just going to quickly do this because it's going to mess up. It's going to mess up because I did not. I'll explain these settings when we go back and do it again and hit apply. This is the first time you imported. Always click yes here, but you can see that this is a mess. Okay. Let me go to smooth so I can switch tools. This is just an absolute mess. And the reason it's an absolute mess is because you brought in a mesh with unwelded vertices and it doesn't quite know what to do with it. So we're just going to create a new file, don't save, and go back to Rhino and do it the right way. Okay, so we're going to go and do an export again. And we're going to overwrite our temp OBJ file, and we're going to go back to mesh here and say welded. Everybody gets confused by this at first. I get asked this a lot. The rest of this is pretty. We don't want to export a NURBS object. We want a mesh. The formatting is, we're on Windows, so carriage return line feed is the end of the line. 17 significant digits. Naming, this is covered in the export script. I wonder if I can set this vertex welding to welded in my script. I'll have to look at that later. But these are covered by the export script that I will put in the Discord. And that's it. So we can say okay, and that dialog has been turned off, and we're going to overwrite that file, yes. And with our mesh settings, okay. So now that we changed it to welded vertices, we can go back to 3DCoat and start with a blank canvas and drag and drop our file in. So this is import into voxel space. And now let's talk about these settings. So the first thing you always need to do when you start with 3DCoat fresh, this is how it will show up as default. Import as child will take, if I don't import as child, I'm going to scale this 2250 and just hit apply. Yes. And we can go to fill here and you can see there, my layers are gone. Okay. This is all a single piece of geometry now. That is not what we want. Don't save. Oh, I clicked on the no. I clicked the wrong thing. My bad. Launch this again. Voxel sculpting, start with a blank. Drag and drop this in. Okay, so the first gotcha was exporting unwelded vertices. The second gotcha is not clicking import as child and losing your tree structure. And now the thing about the voxel room is a voxel is a 1 by 1 by 1 cube. Okay, you want to make sure that you have enough cubes to capture the detail, the detail in your piece. I find that a good default for this is 2250. We are bringing in a very tiny ring, and most people that use 3DCoat are designing a car for a movie or a video game. They're working on large things. We're working on very small things. So that's why you need kind of an extreme scale up here when you bring it in. Some people go 2500, some people go less, but just keep in mind that my scale 2250 is going to be linked to my export setting, how small I make the mesh. If you scale this larger, you want to decrease the mesh by a larger percentage when you leave. If you go lower, you don't want to decimate it as much as I do. And that's pretty much all that's here. Sometimes if you come in here and you don't see scale, it's because it might be on this drop down. Sometimes gets flipped where you only see one of these at a time, but you can go to all controls and see scale, rotate, and move all at the same time. So this, I don't know how it happens, but sometimes it will be on move and you won't see the scale and you're like, what do I do now? Go to all controls, scale, 2250, and then make sure import as child is clicked and hit apply. This is another gotcha, okay? We're at gotcha number 3. This is the first time you've tried to import an object into the scene. Do you want to keep the initial scale and position of the object for export later? So what we did is we increased the size of this 2250, and now we need to scale it back down on the way out. Otherwise, this ring will be the size of a car. Always click yes here. There is never a reason to click no. I don't know why this is even a question, because the thing, when something comes in, it needs to go back out at the right scale. Otherwise, you would have built it that big to begin with. Always click yes. Okay. And now this kind of looks funky because something about 3DCoat is we are still on the import tool. So it's going to say, do you want to import it again? For some workflows that makes sense, not for this one. So as soon as you click on another tool, like my favorite fill, that goes away, and now we are working with the fill tool. Okay, so over here we have cutters, cutters, cutters. These are going to be Boolean subtract. We have geo, geo, geo. These are going to be Boolean union. Sometimes you can just say join all of these together, join all of these together, and cut this from this. Other times you may want to do it in 2 stages. A lot of times I will go quick in Rhino and have a cutter that would completely decimate a feature next to it. I'll just have that cutter cut that piece before I join those 2 positive pieces together. So it just depends if you can do this all at once or if you need to do it in stages. This one we are going to have to do in stages because I'm going to show you another trick in just a second. So what I like to do is come in here and say my gems are going to be white. So if you turn off all of your cutters and you just have, you can go ahead and turn off your sprue. And now my stones are white. So I like to grab a screenshot of this for my little, I use Trello as kind of a job bag to keep track of everything. And I like to have a little screenshot to go with it so people can easily identify the jobs in the shop. So I turn that white. And then for my cutters, I need to look at how I'm going to do this. Oop, sprue can just stay off. So for this, let me turn off these edges for a second, and we can go through and the center line, we'll go ahead and say subtract from the shank. Okay. And then these gem cutters, we can say subtract. I'm going to do a copy and subtract from, so I can show you something in a second. If you're always welcome to do copy and subtract from, so you keep your cutters. If you know you're not going to need them again, you can just do a regular subtract, but I'm going to do a copy and subtract from the shank. And then I'm going to turn that layer off. Oh, these didn't get on the right layer, so I'm going to do a copy and subtract from the shank again. And I'm just going to go ahead and merge that with that, so all of my cutters are on one layer now instead of split in two. Okay. This is how I want the finished look of the ring to be. But my setter is going to have to hammer on this edge to collapse down on top of this stone. That's why I make these edges, just quick, dirty edges. This is how it's going to look when it's finished. But if I don't give him that, he's going to hammer down, and now this is going to be rounded over. He's not going to have a nice edge that he can clean up with a graver. And then by giving him this, he can hammer down, get a clean edge, and then sand it back to this point. So these are quick and dirty edges. Sometimes I forget to do it. Okay? And if I forget to do it, then what I'll do is make the shank the primary layer, and then I will turn on symmetry. And I want X and Y symmetry because I have X and Y symmetry in this piece. And then I would come over here to, let's just say Vox Clay. And, oh, this layer tree moved itself when I changed screens. Brushes. So this brush, if I turn on the intensity, you can see this red outline. Let me make this a different color so you can see this red outline, red profile better. Let's make it green. Okay. So you can see that red hump. You can choose different brushes. So this has a nice V. It'll give you a kind of a crisper point. This has a stronger V where it's a little concave on the edges. This is a big dome. There's donut shape. You get the idea. You can pick different brush, but the default one is going to be perfect for this because I just want to add a tiny bit of extra metal around this rim so he can hammer down on it, take a graver, get a nice crisp edge, and then sand it back to the shape that we have right here. So I'm going to switch over to my Wacom real quick. Move the keyboard out of the way, get the Wacom. And I can show you my Wacom settings as well. So for my Wacom pen, I have this button as a right click and the back button as a keystroke that maps to undo. So my back button is Control Z and my front button is right click. And then I also have it mapped. So I have a 49-inch ultra wide screen. I have to map this to a portion of the screen, so you're only seeing, you know, this edge of the screen over, but it continues on for another length over here. So I have to map this to a portion, and I can click to define that screen area. And so you can see, kind of see that OBS is streaming over here, but I'm going to go right there to that corner, boop, and go down to this corner. And so now it is mapping, well, the top should actually be 0. Now it's mapped to just where 3DCoat is, and I don't want to force proportions, or you can. This is like a personal preference thing, whether you want to force proportions. That means some of your pad is not going to be usable because it's 1-to-1, but I find that I can manage just fine without that, and I can use the full tablet area. So those are my tablet properties, and we have symmetry turned on. So I'm going to, I want box clay, and then I'm just going to, I'm basically pretending that I forgot to do these quick and dirty edges for my setter. So I would just come in here. Oop. Am I on the right layer? Yes. Why is that grabbing the edge? Oh, because it's a square profile. I probably want grow. And I don't do this enough. Okay, so that's not enough intensity. I'm just going to grow this lip, and it doesn't matter if it's ugly because it's just a little extra metal for the setter. Should probably make that smaller. And I do not like steady stroke. It always defaults to on, and I always have to turn it off because I do real quick strokes that don't need, I'm not doing, steady stroke is great for long flowing curves, but I'm never doing that. See how useful the Control Z is on the pen, because I can use my space mouse in one hand and the pen in my other. Okay, I've got a lip there. Just making a lip all the way around. Doesn't matter how ugly it is, because it's going to be hammered and sanded off. And if I turn off my gem cutters, you can see that it made a mess out of that hole. That's why I saved it to do a secondary cut, subtract from, shank, and now I have that gloriously ugly little lip of metal that is just a quick and dirty fix, the same as I kind of would have got from this. I mean, this looks cleaner, but it doesn't matter. It's just something for the setter to use. So this is the point that I would take. Let me turn back to my regular cutter, my regular shader. This is the point that I would take, I would turn off symmetry. And this is a personal preference thing, but I like the way it looks with an orthographic projection instead of a perspective projection. So I'm going to turn it on orthographic. I also would have taken a screenshot before I did my ugly ledges. But here I'm just going to hit print screen, and I'm using GreenShot to select this little area, and that is going to go in the job bag. Okay, so now I'm done with the gems. You can throw those in the trash, and we've got this, and we're kind of ready to go. So the next thing I would do at this point is come down here to SmoothAll and just hit it a couple of times. It's going to ask you if you want to automatically do it twice. I'm just going to say no. I'm going to do it one at a time. I'm going to pick, because I'm going to come and zoom in here. I'm going to come and zoom in here, and I have a, you can set hotkeys for things. So SmoothAll, I have a hotkey set as Control R, and you can hit backspace to delete the hotkey, and then you can hit backspace again to, I think it's backspace. It'll tell you, like in this little hover, hit N to define a hotkey, and hit backspace to delete a hotkey. But Control R is my SmoothAll. I'm going to say Control R, and you can see how that softened. Now, if it's not softening fast enough, or if it's softening too fast, you can undo that, Control Z, and you can resample this. So the way resampling works is it's the size of a car right now. This ring is the size of a car, but the size of the voxels are still 1 by 1 by 1. If you want to make the voxels smaller, this is confusing for some people, but you have two choices. You can make the voxels smaller, or you can make your project bigger. To the people that just always make the voxels smaller, I don't like that, because the camera gets really wonky in 3DCoat when you're working on something tiny. Again, this camera was made to work on something the size of a car. So I find that my camera becomes really unusable when I'm dealing with something really tiny. So I do want this to be the size of a car. But if I need more detail at this point, I can resample it, and I can go up. I can say 2, and it will tell you how big it will be. It's going to go to 3 million triangles to do the little skin on top of it. If it's not smoothing fast enough, I can say 0.5, and now it's going to only take 200,000. So I'm going to say 0.5, okay, and then smooth it again, and you're going to see how much more aggressive it is this time. Like, those nubs are almost gone because of how, switch back here. You know, that just destroyed all of that. And you can see that it's saying that these voxels are half the size, or sorry, have half the resolution as normal. If you're wanting to, let me just, okay, pick a color, Eric. Okay. So I told it to do half the size. So that gives you the 0.5. If you want to go back, you just flip this, okay? If you want to go back, you would do 2/1 times your 0.5, and now you're back. And now you're back to 1. You can do 1/5, okay, which is 0.2. And to get it back, you multiply by 0.5, 5/1. So all you have to do is take the reciprocal, and that's how you get back to the original scale. You probably are not going to want to go, you know, you're not going to want to take that original scale and go to a full 2, but you might say 1 times 3/2. And to get back, you would say, you know, 1.3333 times 2/3, and that will get you back to 1. So just take that reciprocal. That's right? No, sorry, 1.5. Take that reciprocal, and you'll get back to where you started out at. Okay. So I undid back to where we're at the 1 scale, and I'm just going to hit Control R a couple of times. I always kind of do that just to make everything, because when I'm in Rhino, I'm not looking to make sure that it's actually curvature continuous. I strive for it. I don't obsess over it, because a couple of Control R's, and then by the time it hits the buffing wheel, it'll be continuous. So if it's pretty much continuous, it will be actually continuous by the time we get to the finished piece. Okay, so once we do that, the next thing I do, I'm going to turn on my sprue, take this, and I'm going to switch over from voxel mode to surface mode. Now in voxel mode, it's very easy to cut holes in a mesh. When you're in a surface mode, you are no longer working with voxels, you're working with a mesh surface, and we can hit the wireframe view here and see how tiny these triangles are. Now, these tools, I'm going to undo this and go back because I didn't point it out ahead of time. So I am in voxel space here, and if we look at these tools, we are using the clay engine and voxel tools. These surface tools are faux surface tools. They'll try and act like the surface tool, but they're not real surface tools. Okay, these tools are made to work with voxels. Very easy to punch holes, very easy to do a lot of things except add detail here. Look, you can even see how it's a stair step, because that is the 1 by 1 by 1 cubes. Kind of like when you 3D print and you get voxels. You know, you can really see it here, how you have, if you've ever seen a 3D print, you're used to seeing these stair stepping. That's because we really are working with cubes here. When we go over to surface mode, we are no longer working with cubes. This is nice and smooth. And now these tools, we're in the surface side. And so if we do something like, let's see, I want to draw and say remove stretching. I don't want steady stroke. But you can hold down Control and do the invert of it. And now when I do this, I'm going to cut a nice clean thing through it. And because I said remove stretching, you can't really see. I said remove stretching, so it will add triangles as needed. Let me do something tiny here. You see how it just refreshed and added more triangles in? If I said don't remove stretching and just do that here, it doesn't add detail. Okay, so this is something that you can't do in the voxel room, but if you try and cut a hole through this in surface mode, it will probably fail. Cutting holes in a mesh is very, very difficult. That's what the voxel room is for. Okay, so just note these are completely different brushes, and these are very, very good brushes for sculpting. I took T.S. Whittlebach's sculpting class, and I started out in ZBrush, which is what the class is taught in, and about a week and a half in, I said, I really hate this program. It's awful. And I went back to 3DCoat, and back then in the 3DCoat 3 days, ZBrush's brushes were a little bit better. Everything else about the program was hot garbage. Trying to do a Boolean in ZBrush, trying to use my wonderful space mouse so I can move with one hand and sculpt with the other like I would if I was actually working with a piece of clay. Hot garbage. Worked perfectly in 3DCoat. Now, we're past version 4. We're into the, they went from 4 to the 2022 monikers for versions. Their brush system is so much more advanced. It's on par with ZBrush, and this, and everything's named what it should actually do. Just so much better in 3DCoat. I'm going to switch back out of... actually, we're going to stay in wire view mode here. Well, I'll show you that it's what we came in with. I undid all that little sculpting example. I'm going to go back to wire mesh, and I have a hotkey set for this, but under geometry, there is decimate. I have it set to Control D. So when I hit Control D here, it's going to say decimate, and I know because I brought it in at 2250 and there is not a lot of detail on this piece, I can get away with decimating it down by 90% so that my reduced poly count for the shank will be 77,000 triangles. And if I hit OK and I look at this, what I want to see is, I know the side of this ring is flat. I know the side of this ring is flat, so I want to see big triangles. And where these corners are, I want to see tiny triangles. Okay, so everywhere I have curvature, I'm going to turn wireframe off. This looks rough because I didn't show you that I have high contrast on. So high contrast shows me any deviation of the triangles. If I double click that, it doesn't look as rough. It's not highlighting as much, but I'd like to see it. This is kind of like, well, it's not like it at all, but it's the same concept as in Rhino when you say, what is it? Flat shade. Okay, you can really see, now this is a render mesh that's low quality, but you can really see how many triangles Rhino's working with, because a graphics card can't render NURBS. It can only render meshes. So this is what's being sent to the graphics card to render, and you can change that and say smooth shaded, and now the graphics card's saying, all right, very few quads to this mesh, and just make them look more smooth than they are. So this is kind of like the actual thing. Same concept, but completely different by having this, and it'll say right here, double click to activate. Double click. Okay, I will do it the long way around and drag it to 100%. Okay, so this is giving me more contrast between where I have changes in angle. So this is good. I decimated 90%, got that down to, what was it, 77,000 triangles. And for the sprue, I really don't care about this sprue. I'm going to decimate that down to 99 or 98. 3,000 triangles is enough for the sprue, and you can look at see how big that triangle is on that flat compared to how big these triangles are on that flat. Keep a little more detail in there. And the last thing I do is I keep these as separate parts, okay? Because if I decide I want to tip it over and print it upside down, I don't want to have this sprue permanently attached. So when I export this as an STL, I just do that. And give me 1 second and I will show the export side of things. So okay, so now when I go to export this, I have file, and there is a export, and I have export scene. That means everything visible will get exported. So right now I have 2 layers. The other option is export selected objects. So right now I have the sprue selected, and if I did that one, I would only export this one thing, and things that I have turned off, like these extra edges, are not in the scene. They're not visible. So that is export scene. I have that mapped to Control A because I didn't want to override their Control S. So I just Control A in my head is everything visible. Control A. So I'm going to hit Control A, and then it defaults to an OBJ file, but I'm going to change that to STL and say this is channel set band, save it as an STL, click save, and it will give you the option, it will give you the option here to decimate the mesh. I like to decimate it by hand because I can pick, I can preview it and see my triangle size and do all of that ahead of time. I can also decimate things at different levels. So some things that don't need detail like sprues, I can do that at one percentage, and my main thing at a different percentage. So I always say no because I've already done it. But if you don't want to do this, if you want to just decimate it all at once, you can say yes, specify a percentage. It will take everything and decimate it. So before I had 77,000 and 3,000, that got me to 80. If I decimate this by 98% again, this whole thing will be just unusable. So I don't want to do that. I just want to say don't decimate because I've already done it, because I'm a control freak. And there you go. So now this is our file, and we can look at it in Rhino real quick. I can grab that file here, and we can just grab all of this and hide it, and then take our import file, tell it okay. And one of the great things about 3DCoat is I used to have a SolidScape printer, and SolidScape hated Rhino meshes, and I never had one single 3DCoat mesh that threw off the slicer for the SolidScape. So you can see we've got our ugly little lips here, that just that little extra metal for the setter, and we can even turn on flat shading, and you can see it's easier to see the triangles. Oh, we can actually just go to wireframe because we're in Rhino. Wireframe. I don't have a button for wireframe. Where is it? I never use it. Okay. And now you can see the triangles a little bit better. Let me move this to a different layer so it changes the color. Now you can see that we've got, medium-sized triangles, tiny sized triangles. Everywhere we have curvature, that is more than enough detail for our thing. And the file size ended up being 3.9 meg. That is much better than just exporting from Rhino and having that. Let me take this off screen and see what the OBJ size was. That wasn't too bad. That was 30 megs on that OBJ export. And that is about it. There's plenty more things to 3DCoat, but hopefully that shows you how to get into it, out of it. There were those 3 things that constantly trip people up. Hopefully that helps you guys avoid those pitfalls, and it just makes, you know, so here I built the shank with kind of a round over, but if you built this as a square shank and we're like, fillet's failing, I just want to get this a little bit round, you take the shank in, you switch back over. Let's move this back over to the voxel side of things. Okay. You bring this in here, you drop the resolution on just the shank, not everything else, but just the shank. You resample this down to like 0.1. Okay. You get it really, really, that may be too much. 0.2. Okay. And smooth and tell it okay. And you just hit Control R, SmoothAll one time, and it will take that sharp edge and give you the best little fillet possible. You know, it's just going to round over those edges real quick, real fast. Then you bring it back to resample. And what did I do? 0.2, so that's 1/5. So now I need to take it to 5 to get back to the resolution I had before. And you do that first so that when you cut your cutters and you do all that stuff, that detail will remain, but you just got this insanely fast little fillet that you would have struggled for 30 minutes in Rhino trying to get, you know, that little fillet worked in. So yeah, it's a huge, okay, we want to fillet this. We will change this over to surface mode, tell it okay. And now if we hit Control R, oh, we're on the wrong layer. We hit Control R, that's not doing it fast enough. We resample like I just did, 0.2, tell it okay, hit Control R, and now that, oh, get off the keyboard. That is a nice little fillet. And then we go back, resample. So I did 0.2, which is 1/5, go times 5 to get it back to the resolution of the scene. And now we've got plenty of detail and a nice smooth looking fillet. Okay. And a bug. Look, it's a mini version. Okay. That's it for this video. Let's see. I've got one question. Won't you do that with Rhino sub D tools? No, I won't do any of this with Rhino sub D tools because it is not remotely the same. I want a, let's go back to the wireframe here. I'm not sure which part, because Juan, I missed that you asked that question, but sub D is 4-sided quad mesh, and I want triangles because some slicers don't like quads. They will only take an STL, which is 3-sided. They won't take an OBJ file with quads. So sub D won't do that. I'm trying to think of all the other things that sub D would do. I don't want to do a Boolean with sub D. I want to do that in 3DCoat because I will never have an issue with a coincident surface, you know, two surfaces that are kind of laying on top of each other where the Boolean will get confused. I don't want to do fillets, or sometimes I do a fillet in Rhino. If I look at it and go, Rhino can handle that, no problem, I'll do a fillet fillet and NURBS, and then there's no reason to go to sub D. But if I know Rhino's going to have a problem doing that fillet, then why would I want to go and do sub D, where now I have to do every little link and adjust the edge to it? No, I can't think of. I struggle to think of something that I would actually use sub D for instead of just straight NURBS, because sub D does not have the same level of history that Rhino has. So I do sometimes do surface modeling in Rhino, but I usually have parent curves that I edit. I deleted everything from this file earlier, but I usually have parent curves that I edit that control that, which controls the shape of the shank. You know, I have key curves, and I have this history that will allow me to change the shape of the shank real quick, real easy. You can't do this with sub D. So like, there's nothing that I would actually use sub D for that I can think of. But sorry, I'm not sure what you were asking about. Wouldn't you just do that in sub D? All right. Any other questions? Throw them in chat. And Anaz, do you have any other questions? No? Okay. Well, we will end this stream. Yes. Okay. There's one more gotcha that I didn't think of, and that is, so when we went and did the export, and under these options, there was something else, which is map Rhino Z to object Y. So in a lot of programs, in Rhino, Z is our north or up and down. Okay. So I generally say, if I'm giving cardinal directions, this is north, south, east, west, and Z is up and down, okay? In a lot of other programs, Y is their up and down. Why? I don't know why. It's really weird. So in 3DCoat, I do have that as a setting, where if I come into, thank you, Anaz, I would have totally forgot about this. And if I go to preferences, I can say in, out, viewport, Z up coordinate system. Okay, so I'm using a Z up coordinate system, which I do not think is the default, because a lot of people coming from, so 3DCoat is like industry standard for painting UV mapping, where they can unroll it's very good at slicing up UVs and retopolizing a mesh. That is what it is known for. That is like its original thing. Everybody used it, no matter what they were using for the modeling, or people that use ZBrush, they would send it to 3DCoat to retopolize and paint before it went to production in a professional workflow. They built a really good clay engine and voxel engine and surface engine later, but people coming from those systems, it was a Y up. Maya was a big one. Moto, they were coming from a Y up. We come from a Z up. So this is one thing that you should change. Your 3D mouse, I have my 3D mouse settings in here. Zoom is really weird. I have that cranked way down low. Zoom to radius speed, I have that cranked way down low. I think everything else should be standard. I showed you my total of 4 hotkeys that I have set for quickly getting in and out of here, and I usually am in and out of 3DCoat in less than 5 minutes at the end of a model. I've skipped all of Rhino's Boolean tools, all of Rhino's fillet tools, and I can get all that done in 5 minutes here. It is much faster, which is why I continue to use it. I'm just going to show each of these screens slowly in case I did change something that I don't remember. You guys can, pause the video and look at it later. In, out, my external 2D editor. So this is for UV mapping. You would unroll a surface flat and then take it into Photoshop, paint it, bring it back in here, and that UV would roll back onto the 3D surface. I don't think I use any of this. I don't think I use any of this. I don't use any of this. The viewport, Z-up. We use millimeters, which I think is the default because they're Ukrainian and on the metric system. Don't think I use any of this. Brushing, I think this is all standard. 3D mouse, this is modified. These are good default settings. Theme, I think this is the standard theme. Tools, auto select edges when face is deleted. Skip the SmoothAll dialog in the sculpt room. I have that checked, but next time I reload, I wonder if I hit save if it will permanently do it, because every time I open 3DCoat, it asks me the first time, do you want to click save? Options, we'll just call this, I think the version I'm on is 2022-39. Okay, smart extrude, skip the question about downgrade, restore. And beta, show beta tools. So I definitely don't have anything set in here. So those are my settings. I showed all the settings in the Rhino export. And any other questions? All right, well, if that's it, I will end stream, and you guys can always jump in the Discord and ask something else if you think of it later. All right, bye guys.